Shut up. And don't move. The voice was sharp, whispered, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Alexander Crane, CEO of Crane Tech and one of the most powerful men on the East Coast, froze with one hand still on the steering wheel of his Mercedes S-Class. He hadn't even buckled his seatbelt when he felt a firm hand clamp over his mouth from behind. His body tensed. Reflexively, he started to turn, but the voice came again, lower this time. Don't turn around. Don't speak. They're listening. He caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Naomi Reed. His maid. The black woman he barely noticed most days as she silently moved through his penthouse, cleaning, organizing, caring for his 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. Now she was crouched in the back seat of his car, eyes wide, breath short, and urgency radiating off her like heat. Naomi? He mumbled through her hand. She slowly released it, but her eyes never left his. Mr. Crane, if you value your company, your legacy, your daughter's future, you'll listen and not say a word. Not yet. Alexander narrowed his eyes. What is this? She leaned closer. I heard them. Sebastian and Rachel. Just now. I was cleaning near the executive bathroom. They didn't see me. They were laughing. Laughing? They said, tomorrow morning, you'll sign away everything. That the merger with those Japanese investors? It's a trap. Fake shell companies. You'll sign and then you're out. Gone. Alexander blinked, the blood draining from his face. Sebastian Cole, his closest friend and business partner for over 20 years. And Rachel Monroe, his assistant, the one who knew his passwords, his calendar, his daughter's allergies. He had trusted them more than anyone. Naomi's voice dropped even lower. They said you're too soft. That you'd sign whatever Rachel puts in front of you. And that once it's done, you'll be the sentimental fool who didn't see it coming. His jaw clenched. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't, she said calmly. But you should know this. I didn't come out here to save you. I came out here because they talked about Sophie. That stopped him cold. They said, if you resisted after signing, they'd leak things. Personal things. Things that would hurt your daughter. Alexander's pulse spiked. They threatened my daughter? They didn't say it outright. But they said they had leverage. That even if you did figure it out, you'd be too scared to fight back. He stared at her. Why would you tell me this? Naomi looked him straight in the eye. Because I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet. And because I've seen Sophie. I've held her while she cried herself to sleep. She deserves better than to grow up in the ruins of your failure. Silence settled in the car like fog. Alexander slowly started the engine, pulling out of the underground garage with Naomi still crouched in the back. His mind raced, through board meetings, late-night calls with Sebastian, gentle reminders from Rachel. All the little signs. All the trust. And suddenly, it all felt like an elaborate setup. I need names, he said quietly. Dates. Everything you heard. Naomi nodded. But not here. Not in this car. Their mics might still be active. I'll write it down. But Mr. Crane. He looked up in the mirror. This isn't just about betrayal, she said. It's about survival. And for the first time in years, Alexander Crane realized he was no longer the one in control. They drove in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Alexander turned off the main roads, taking side streets with no cameras, no traffic. The luxury sedan hummed quietly, but inside the car, tension pressed down like a thundercloud. Finally, he parked in an empty lot near an abandoned bookstore he used to visit in college. He turned off the engine and slowly rotated to face the woman still seated in the back. You have 60 seconds, he said, voice low and controlled. Tell me who you are. Really? Naomi didn't flinch. She leaned forward, hands resting on the front passenger seat. My name is Naomi Reed. I'm 32. Born in Chicago. Moved to New York 5 years ago after I lost my nursing license. Alexander's brows furrowed. You were a nurse? She nodded. Pediatrics. I used to work at Bayview Children's Hospital. Until one of the surgeons messed up a file, and a child was given the wrong dosage. They needed someone to blame. And they picked you. I had just gotten off a double shift. I didn't even touch that chart. But I was the only black nurse on that team, and the doctor's uncle sat on the hospital board. Alexander's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of boardroom favoritism all too well. I lost my license. No hospital would touch me. And with my record, even getting hired as a maid was hard. But I needed to eat. So I swallowed my pride. And ended up in my house. Naomi's eyes locked with his. No. I ended up with Sophie. Her voice softened. I've worked for people who treat staff like wallpaper. But Sophie, she's different. She asks questions. She listens. She notices when someone's hurting. Alexander didn't say anything. He knew his daughter was special. Sensitive. Ever since his wife's death, Sophie had become quiet, withdrawn, except around Naomi. You were never just a maid to her, he murmured. No. I never intended to stay long. Just enough to save up for my appeal process. But then, I saw things. Heard things. Like what? Naomi looked away for a moment. Rachel keeps a second phone. I've seen her take it out late at night in the office when she thinks everyone's gone. She talks in Japanese sometimes. And once, I saw Sebastian slip a flash drive into your briefcase, then take it out and replace it a minute later. Alexander stiffened. When was that? 3 weeks ago. You were on a call. He said it was just a formatting fix. But the way he looked at Rachel afterward, Naomi shook her head. They've been planning this for a long time. And they think you're too kind, or too blind, to ever notice. Alexander stared out the window, his reflection faint in the glass. Do you know what bothers me the most? He said quietly. Naomi waited. That they're probably right. He turned back to her, eyes hardening. For years I've believed in loyalty. I let people in. I trusted them. And now. He stopped himself. Naomi reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote everything down. Names, dates, fragments of conversations. I know it's not formal evidence, but it's a place to start. Alexander took the paper and read in silence. Rachel's late-night calls to Tokyo. Sebastian's off-site meetings with consultants during key investor periods. Sudden document changes on shared drives. Fake vendor names tied to non-existent contracts. It was all there, enough smoke to suggest a fire. You said they might be listening, he said slowly. Even now. Naomi nodded. Sebastian has a habit. He leaves audio bugs in unexpected places, flower vases, car vents, even umbrella handles. I learned that from a previous house he visited. Alexander stared at her. You're not just a maid or a nurse. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. I pay attention, she said. When you have nothing, you learn to see everything. Alexander leaned back, mind racing. Do you know anyone trustworthy? Someone who could verify this? Quietly. Naomi's lips curled slightly. Maybe. But I think you already know who. He looked up. And in that moment, Alexander Crane realized that the real war hadn't started yet. But it would. Alexander Crane sat at the kitchen table in his penthouse, the city lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. The clock on the wall read 12:47 a.m., but sleep was the last thing on his mind. Naomi sat across from him, silent, nursing a cup of black coffee. The paper she had given him was spread across the table, alongside a yellow legal pad filled with Alexander's increasingly frantic notes and circled names. Sebastian Cole. Rachel Monroe. The Yamada Group. Fake companies. Shell transfers. Signatures. He exhaled sharply and leaned back in the chair. I need to know exactly what they're planning to do to me. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. They're going to make you sign a merger that looks legitimate on paper but is actually transferring all controlling shares to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. That company is owned by one of Sebastian's silent partners, Takeshi Nakamura. Alexander blinked. I've heard that name. He's on the board of Yamada. He's also under investigation in Japan. Embezzlement. They want your company to be the last piece of their money laundering puzzle. His throat went dry. So I signed that contract, and everything I built, 20 years of blood and sweat, becomes theirs? Naomi nodded. And then they leak a press release saying you're stepping down to pursue philanthropic efforts. Make it look like your choice. Alexander's eyes narrowed. And if I resist? Naomi didn't flinch. Then they use everything they've gathered on you over the years, every expense report, every minor mistake, every private text, to paint you as unstable, possibly even corrupt. They've built a narrative, a backup plan. He stared at her, stunned. How do you know all this? Naomi took a long sip of coffee, then looked him straight in the eye. Because Rachel said it out loud. I was cleaning the glass door to the rooftop lounge. She was on the phone. She said, either he signs or we bury him. His ego won't even see it coming. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. She's been with me for 10 years. Naomi said nothing. And Sebastian, we started this company together. I know. I trusted them. I know. The room fell into silence. And then Alexander stood. He walked to the window, arms crossed, staring down at the streetlights below. They've planned this for how long? Naomi answered softly, at least 2 years. I found internal emails dated 18 months ago. Rachel flagged certain investor contacts as vulnerable. Sebastian started shifting your international portfolio structure not long after. Alexander turned slowly. Why didn't I see it? Because you believed in people, Naomi said quietly. Because you were busy raising a daughter. Because you thought loyalty meant something. His eyes dropped to the paper in front of him. His name, Alexander Crane, appeared in every document, every forged agreement. If I sign tomorrow, he said almost to himself, they'll have it all. Yes. And if I don't? Naomi paused. They'll panic. They'll accelerate their backup plan. Maybe try to force you out legally. Maybe worse. Alexander looked up. What do you mean, worse? Naomi's expression turned grim. I think they'd try to fabricate a scandal. Leak something to the press. Make it seem like you're mentally unfit. They talked about doctors. About lawyers. I don't think this ends with just a failed merger. He swallowed hard. Suddenly, this wasn't just business. It was war. I need help, he said, almost reluctantly. Someone who can move fast. Someone who knows where to look. Naomi's voice was calm. There's one man. You fired him last year. I didn't fire anyone last year. Sebastian did it in your name. His name's Gabriel Torres. Used to work security and internal audit. He asked too many questions. Alexander's mind raced. Gabriel Torres. Yes, he remembered him now. A quiet man with a background in the NYPD, always watching, always calculating. He rarely smiled, but his eyes missed nothing. Gabriel had a habit of digging too deep, asking the questions no one else dared to ask. At the time, Alexander had thought he was just being thorough. Now, he realized that was exactly why Sebastian wanted him gone. He reached for his phone. You have his number? Naomi slid a small notepad toward him. Alexander dialed. One ring. Then a deep, familiar voice on the other end. This is Torres. There was a beat. Gabriel. It's Alexander Crane. I think I made a mistake letting you go. Silence. Then a dry chuckle. I figured that day would come. What's going on? Alexander's voice dropped. I need you. Tonight. Another pause. Then, firm and clear, send me the address. Gabriel Torres arrived just after 2 a.m. He stepped into the penthouse like a man who never forgot a floor plan. Same eyes, sharp, calculating. Same presence, quiet but commanding. He wore a dark coat, leather gloves, and carried a worn black satchel that looked older than the building itself. Alexander motioned him into the living room. Naomi stood nearby, arms crossed. Gabriel gave her a brief nod. So, you're the maid who saved the show. Naomi didn't smile. I clean more than floors. Gabriel cracked a rare smirk and turned to Alexander. Let me guess, your right-hand man and your trusted assistant are trying to hand you over to the wolves. Alexander exhaled. They've been planning it for over 2 years. Naomi heard a conversation tonight. She brought it to me. Gabriel glanced at Naomi, impressed. That takes guts. She did more than listen, Alexander said. She wrote everything down. Names, meetings, shell companies. And I've seen some of it myself now, it checks out. Gabriel sat, pulled a tablet from his satchel, and tapped in a code. Funny thing is, he said as the screen lit up, I never stopped working. After I got canned, I kept digging. Something never sat right with the way I was dismissed. Alexander raised an eyebrow. You knew. I suspected, Gabriel replied. But Sebastian covered his tracks well. Until recently. He turned the tablet around. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, company names, all tied to overseas banks and fake subsidiaries. Naomi leaned forward. Those names, I saw 2 of them on Rachel's call logs. Gabriel nodded. She's been funneling money through 4 dummy vendors. The paper trail leads to Nakamura's holding firm. And here's the kicker. He swiped to another screen. There's an unsigned document drafted 6 months ago. It names Sebastian Cole as interim CEO, pending your voluntary resignation. Alexander's hands tightened around the edge of the table. Voluntary? Of course. They even filed a press statement draft, Gabriel added, full of flowery lies. Stepping down to spend more time with family, a legacy of innovation, grateful for the journey. Alexander shook his head slowly. Bastards. They planned everything. Gabriel's voice hardened. And they're arrogant enough to think you'll never find out. Naomi folded her arms. They're wrong. Gabriel looked between them. You have 2 options. Go to the police now, hand them this evidence. And risk it leaking, Alexander said. Risk it being buried. Spun against me. Gabriel nodded. Exactly. Or, you let them walk right into their own trap. Alexander looked up. You mean pretend I don't know anything? Gabriel smiled thinly. You play the fool. Just for one more day. Naomi stepped closer. It's dangerous. But if it works, they'll incriminate themselves in front of witnesses. You'll have everything, documents, recordings, even motive. Alexander rubbed his temples. His company. His name. His daughter. Everything was riding on this. He looked at Gabriel. You said you kept digging. Why? Gabriel shrugged. Because I don't like snakes. And because I've seen men like you before, good men who get destroyed because they don't see the knife coming. Alexander nodded slowly. I saw it tonight, he said. And thanks to Naomi, now I know exactly where the blade is. Naomi met his gaze. So what do we do? Gabriel sat forward, elbows on his knees. Tomorrow morning, you walk into that building like everything's normal. You smile. You sign nothing. You stall. Meanwhile, I'll be in the building, with backup. And Naomi? He looked at her. You're going to record everything. Every word. Every whisper. We'll catch them red-handed. She didn't hesitate. Done. Alexander rose from the couch, tall and steady. For 15 years, he'd been the visionary. The builder. The mentor. Now, he would be the executioner. Let them come, he said. Let them try. At precisely 8:10 a.m., Alexander Crane stepped into the glass lobby of Crane Tech with a calmness that didn't match the storm building inside him. He wore his usual tailored navy suit, the same one he always wore on major deal days. His tie was perfectly knotted, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his face wore the pleasant, practiced smile of a man completely in control. No one, not the receptionist, not the junior managers passing by, could detect the war unfolding behind his eyes. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual, even though it was only 35 seconds. He used the time to breathe slowly, evenly, reminding himself what was at stake. As the doors opened, Rachel Monroe stood waiting in front of his office. She smiled that same soft, efficient smile she always used. Good morning, Mr. Crane. Everything is ready for the 10 a.m. merger review. I've laid out the contracts in the boardroom, marked the signature pages for you, and triple-checked the hospitality suite for the Japanese team. Alexander returned the smile with perfect ease. Thank you, Rachel. I knew I could count on you. If she noticed anything different in his tone, she didn't show it. Naomi was already in the building. She had arrived an hour earlier, under the guise of assisting the hospitality staff, but Gabriel had secured her access badge to restricted floors. She wore a Bluetooth earpiece under her left braid and carried a tiny recording device sewn into the lining of her cleaning apron. Her job was simple: get close to Rachel and Sebastian, stay invisible, and capture everything. By 9 a.m., Sebastian Cole arrived. Tall, confident, every strand of his silvering hair in place. He greeted Alexander with a hug and a clap on the back like nothing in the world could go wrong. "This is the big one, my friend," he said, flashing his most trustworthy smile. "The Yamada Group is ready to finalize, and you, well, you just need to be your charming self and sign what we prepared." Alexander nodded, as if genuinely grateful. "That's what I do best, isn't it?" he replied, his voice smooth. He noticed Rachel glance at Sebastian and offer the briefest nod, subtle but telling. They believed he was still in the dark. They believed today would be the end of Alexander Crane's reign. In reality, it was the beginning of theirs. Meanwhile, Gabriel had taken up position in the small security monitoring room 2 floors below, his credentials reactivated temporarily thanks to Naomi's copied access code and Alexander's override. From there, he had full view of the conference room, hallway microphones, and most importantly, the backup audio feed Naomi had activated from inside Rachel's purse, planted while she accidentally bumped into her earlier that morning. At 9:37 a.m., Naomi entered the executive break room where Rachel and Sebastian were huddled over their phones. "They still don't suspect anything," Rachel whispered. "He smiled at me this morning like he always does. Like a puppy. I almost feel bad." Sebastian chuckled under his breath. "Don't. By the end of today, Crane will be a sentimental footnote in his own story." Naomi continued wiping the counter slowly, staying in their blind spot. Rachel added, "He'll sign, and then next week we'll release the press kit. The board will back us. The Japanese transfer clears by Monday, and we're done." Sebastian leaned back in his chair. "We'll leave him with enough to save face. He can retire, write a memoir, How I Built It and Lost It. We'll even buy a few copies." Rachel laughed. "Only if he puts our names in the dedication." Naomi didn't move. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She wiped the same spot twice, nodded once, and exited quietly. Gabriel, listening in real time, tapped his earpiece twice. Recording locked. Time stamped. Stored on 2 encrypted servers. Back upstairs, Alexander sat in his office, pretending to review a spreadsheet on his screen. In truth, he was reading a message from Gabriel. "We got them. They're celebrating already." He exhaled through his nose. "Not yet." He stood, straightened his jacket, and made his way to the boardroom. Rachel was already inside, preparing the papers in a precise row. 3 copies of each document. Color-coded tabs. Pens lined up perfectly. Sebastian stood near the windows, staring out at the skyline like a man about to conquer it. Alexander walked in and gave them both a warm nod. "Shall we?" Rachel smiled sweetly. "Whenever you're ready, sir. You'll see yellow tabs where you need to sign." He walked to the head of the table and sat down slowly, looking at the contracts as if for the first time. He didn't reach for the pen. Instead, he looked at Sebastian. "You've been with me since the beginning." Sebastian nodded, cautiously. "That's right." "And Rachel, you've been with me almost a decade." She smiled. "It's been an honor." Alexander looked down at the documents again, then up at both of them. "I just have one question before we start," he said, his voice smooth but deliberate. "Why?" There was a flicker, barely perceptible, in Sebastian's eyes. Rachel tilted her head slightly, confused. "Why what?" she asked. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Why did you think I wouldn't find out?" Neither of them spoke. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the boardroom door opened. Gabriel Torres stepped inside with 2 federal agents behind him. Rachel's lips parted slightly. Sebastian took a half step forward, but Alexander held up a hand. "It's over," he said calmly. "Everything you said in the break room is recorded. Every bank transfer is traced. Every shell company is mapped. You're done." Rachel's knees buckled, and she reached for the back of her chair. Sebastian didn't move. His jaw clenched and a vein twitched in his temple. "You don't know what you're doing," he said slowly. "You're making a mistake." Alexander stood, buttoning his jacket with quiet resolve. "No," he said. "I made the mistake 2 years ago, when I stopped listening to my instincts. Today, I'm finally listening again." For a moment, the boardroom fell into a silence so thick it was almost oppressive. The agents didn't move. Neither did Alexander. It was Sebastian who broke first. He stepped back from the conference table with forced composure, straightened his jacket, and looked at Gabriel with a calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I assume this is your doing," he said. Gabriel's response was flat. "Mine and hers." He tilted his head slightly toward Naomi, who stepped into the room just behind the agents. She wasn't in uniform anymore. Instead, she wore a clean black blouse and slacks, sharp, composed, and completely unrecognizable from the woman who once scrubbed the executive washroom. Rachel stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You," she breathed. "You're just a maid." Naomi's expression didn't change. "No, Rachel. I'm the reason you're going to prison." The words landed like a hammer, and the tremble in Rachel's hands betrayed her. "You can't do this," Sebastian snapped, turning to Alexander. "You don't know what you're walking into. Do you have any idea what kind of people you've crossed? Do you know who Nakamura is?" Alexander's voice was calm, even. "I know exactly who he is. And I know you were ready to sell this company to him behind my back. You used my trust, my daughter's name, even my grief, because you thought I wouldn't fight back." His voice didn't rise, but every word carried weight. "You orchestrated this takeover while pretending to be my friend. You fabricated contracts. You moved money through fake vendors. You were going to leave me with nothing but a carefully worded press release and a poisoned reputation." Rachel sank into the chair beside her. Her hands were shaking now. She reached into her handbag as if searching for something, maybe a tissue, maybe an excuse, but one of the agents stepped forward and stopped her. "No sudden movements, ma'am," he said. She froze. Sebastian looked at the agent with contempt. "We haven't been charged with anything." "Not yet," the agent replied. "But I suggest you call a lawyer. Now." Alexander turned to Naomi. "You have the recording?" She nodded and handed him a slim flash drive. Gabriel stepped forward and laid several folders on the table: bank records, internal memos, call logs, and a copy of the fake contract that would have transferred majority ownership to the Nakamura front. "We've sent all of this to the DOJ and the Securities and Exchange Commission," he said. "They're not interested in just taking down 2 executives. They're going after the entire chain, starting with you." Sebastian's cool facade finally cracked. His voice turned to steel. "You're making a mistake, Alex. You think you've won, but you don't know what they'll do to people like us who talk. This isn't about business anymore, it's survival." Alexander didn't blink. "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you turned my life into a target." Rachel, voice now barely above a whisper, tried to pivot. "I never wanted to hurt you. It was Sebastian. He said you were too distracted, too soft, that it was either this or the company would collapse. I was just trying to protect." "Yourself," Naomi interrupted. "You were protecting yourself." Rachel looked up with tear-filled eyes, but no one in the room offered her sympathy. Gabriel signaled the agents, who moved forward. "Sebastian Cole, Rachel Monroe, you are under investigation for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, embezzlement, and attempted hostile acquisition through falsified documentation. You have the right to remain silent." The words continued as the agents began cuffing them, one by one. Rachel let out a low sob as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. Sebastian didn't make a sound. His face remained stoic, but his eyes burned with fury. As they were escorted out of the room, Sebastian turned his head slightly toward Alexander. "This isn't over," he said. Alexander stepped forward, lowering his voice to a deadly whisper. "It was over the moment you underestimated me." The doors closed behind the agents. The room fell quiet again, except for the sound of Naomi setting down her earpiece on the table. Alexander turned to her. "You didn't have to risk yourself like that." Naomi looked at him, steady and firm. I wasn't risking myself. I was protecting something worth protecting. Gabriel folded his arms and exhaled. You've still got a company, Alex. And now, you've got a clean slate. Alexander sat down slowly at the head of the table. For the first time in months, maybe years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He looked at Naomi again, this woman he'd barely noticed just weeks ago, and realized that in saving his company, she had also reminded him of who he truly was. Then let's rebuild it, he said. This time the right way. Later that evening, long after the federal agents had left with Sebastian and Rachel in custody, the penthouse was quiet again. But the silence no longer felt heavy, it felt earned. Alexander stood by the kitchen counter, holding a glass of scotch, not drinking it. He had replayed the events of the day in his mind a dozen times, each pass peeling back a new layer of betrayal. But no thought lingered longer than the one question he hadn't yet asked. Who exactly was Naomi Reed? She sat across from him now, on the same couch she used to clean every morning at sunrise. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were alert, watching him the same way she had in that car days ago, calm but ready for anything. He set the glass down and walked over. You didn't just overhear a conversation, Naomi. You knew how to move, how to record, how to infiltrate. You coordinated with Gabriel like you'd worked together before. And you didn't flinch once while watching two people get arrested. Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the floor, took a breath, and then met his eyes. You want the truth? I think I've earned it. She gave a small nod. I was born in Southside Chicago. My mom died when I was 8. My grandmother raised me, Josephine Reed. She was a nurse for 32 years. Taught me everything she knew. Taught me how to listen, how to think fast, how to survive without being seen. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from her. I got into NYU with a full ride. Nursing school. Top of my class. But I was impatient. I didn't just want to work shifts, I wanted to fight injustice. I started documenting patterns. Disparities in patient care. How black mothers were dismissed. How low-income children were given cheaper treatments. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I went to the hospital board. Thought they'd thank me. Instead, they labeled me disruptive. When a child died because a senior doctor changed the wrong chart, they pinned it on me. Said I was the last one who touched the file. I wasn't. But I couldn't prove it. Alexander listened, the weight of her words sinking into him. I lost everything. My license. My reputation. Nobody would hire me. So I started over. Cleaning houses. Living under the radar. Until one day, I saw a listing from a man named Crane, single father, needs quiet help. He leaned forward slightly. And you took it. I didn't think I'd stay long, she admitted. But then I met Sophie. At the mention of his daughter's name, Alexander's shoulders softened. She's not like most kids, Naomi said, her voice warming. She listens. Really listens. One day she asked me why I looked sad even when I smiled. I didn't even realize I did that. She asks me that sometimes too, Alexander murmured. Naomi smiled faintly. I stayed because of her. And because I saw something else. He tilted his head. What? You, she said simply. I saw a man who had been broken in ways he didn't talk about. A man who tried to keep going by building walls of glass and steel. But inside he was just tired. Alexander didn't deny it. I've seen wealthy men before, she continued, but not one who kept a picture of his daughter's first drawing in his wallet. Not one who walked her to school himself when he wasn't traveling. You were hurting, but you were still showing up. That meant something. He looked at her closely now, truly seeing her, not as a maid or an informant, but as a person who had risked everything without asking for anything in return. You saved my life, Naomi. My company. My reputation. You gave me the truth when I had none. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. You gave me a second chance. Whether you meant to or not. Alexander stood and crossed the room to the safe tucked behind a bookshelf. He keyed in the code and pulled out a small folder, sealed, aged, nearly forgotten. He brought it over and placed it on the coffee table between them. I found this last night after everything happened. It's the original background check file from when you were hired. I didn't even read it back then. Rachel handled it. Naomi slowly opened the folder. Inside were the standard forms. References. And attached to the back, a single photocopy of a letter, handwritten in faded ink. Naomi's breath caught. It's from Josephine, Alexander said softly. I recognized the handwriting. My father kept her letters in a box after they lost contact. Turns out she was his cousin. That makes you my family. Naomi stared at the page, blinking quickly. She always said she had family in New York. That someone out there would do the right thing if I ever needed it. Alexander exhaled slowly, his voice steady but thick. She was right. Naomi looked up at him. Her eyes shimmered, but her voice stayed strong. So what now? Alexander didn't hesitate. Now, he said, we rebuild everything. Together. 2 days after the arrests, Crane Tech was quieter than usual, but not because of fear. The whispers in the hallways had shifted from suspicion to awe. The staff knew something had happened. Rumors of federal agents, private security teams, and emergency board meetings spread fast, but no one dared to say anything out loud. All they knew was that Sebastian Cole and Rachel Monroe were gone. And Alexander Crane was still standing. He walked into the executive boardroom at noon sharp, where the interim board had convened for an emergency session. There were 7 of them, all shareholders, senior partners, or high-level advisors. Some had known Alexander since the company's founding. Others had always kept their distance. As he entered, they all stood. Alexander, said Mr. Morrison, the acting chair. First of all, let me say, on behalf of the board, we commend your restraint. Most men in your position would have panicked. You didn't. Alexander gave a short nod. Thank you. But I didn't do it alone. He gestured toward the doorway. Naomi stepped in, composed, professional, now wearing a crisp white blouse and navy blazer. The transformation from maid to executive presence was almost jarring. Some members of the board exchanged glances, confused. This, Alexander said, is Naomi Reed. You may not know her, but she knows this company better than you think. While Sebastian and Rachel were orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud, Naomi was the one who uncovered their entire operation. Without her, we'd all be sitting here wondering how our shares disappeared overnight. Naomi remained quiet but stood tall. Mr. Morrison blinked. Is the one who reported them? She's the one who saved us, Alexander corrected. And now I'm making that official. He placed a folder on the table. I'm promoting Naomi Reed to Director of Corporate Integrity and Risk Prevention. Effective immediately. There was a beat of silence. One board member, an older man with thick glasses, cleared his throat. Alexander, with all due respect, that's highly irregular. She has no formal executive background. Neither did I when I started this company, Alexander replied smoothly. And if experience mattered more than loyalty, then Rachel would still be sitting here. Another member shifted in his chair. Are you asking us to approve this? I'm not asking, Alexander said calmly. This isn't a symbolic appointment. Naomi already proved herself more capable in 1 week than some executives have in 5 years. If anyone here has a problem with her title, they're welcome to resign. I'll buy back their shares personally. That silenced the room. Naomi remained expressionless, but under the table her hands tightened. Mr. Morrison leaned forward. You're serious about this? Alexander nodded. Dead serious. Morrison exhaled slowly. Then so be it. Welcome to the table, Ms. Reed. Naomi nodded once. Thank you. The meeting continued, but Alexander wasn't focused on financial projections. His mind was already on the next move. That evening, he returned to the penthouse and found Sophie coloring quietly at the kitchen island. Naomi sat nearby, helping her sound out words from a storybook. It was the first time in weeks that the house felt like a home again. Alexander poured himself tea, not whiskey this time. He looked over at Naomi, who gave him a tired smile. How was the board? She asked. They didn't like it, he said, sipping. But they'll adjust. You really didn't have to do that. I know, he replied. But I wanted to. That title is just the start. Naomi raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He walked over and set his cup down next to her. I want to offer you more than a position, he said. I want to offer you a partnership. Naomi blinked, caught off guard. A partnership? In rebuilding this company the right way. In protecting people like you who never get hurt. I've spent most of my life building things that looked impressive but felt empty. You reminded me why I started any of this in the first place. Naomi's voice softened. What exactly are you asking? Alexander smiled. Said, lead with me. Help me build a new kind of legacy. Not just in business, but in people. Naomi looked down at Sophie, who had dozed off on the couch, crayon still in hand. She looked back up at him. I'll stay. But only if we agree on one thing. What's that? We don't just protect the company. We protect every voice inside it. Alexander extended his hand. Deal. Naomi shook it. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just cleaning up someone else's mess. She was helping rebuild something that truly mattered. 3 weeks passed. On the surface, everything looked stable. The press release about Sebastian and Rachel's arrest had been carefully crafted, factual but restrained. Alexander issued a formal statement thanking law enforcement for their swift action and reaffirming CraneTech's commitment to integrity and transparency. Investors calmed. Stocks stabilized. And internally, the company began to breathe again. But Alexander wasn't fooled. He knew men like Sebastian didn't act alone. And criminals who moved $20 million through shell accounts didn't just disappear after a pair of handcuffs. One morning, Gabriel Torres walked into Alexander's office with a folder in hand and a look that confirmed his suspicions. They had help, Gabriel said, closing the door behind him. Alexander didn't ask from where. He simply reached for the folder and began flipping through it. Multiple overseas transfers traced to an account in Panama. Legal documents prepared in Tokyo. And, most troubling of all, private communications between Rachel and a man named Kazuo Tanaka, one of Nakamura's top financial advisors. After Sebastian and Rachel were taken down, Gabriel explained, this guy started moving money, fast. Pulling resources out of the Caymans. Liquidating assets under dummy names. Alexander looked up. Is he trying to vanish? Gabriel shook his head. No. He's preparing for something. Retaliation, maybe. Damage control. Either way, it's not over. Alexander leaned back in his chair. Then we stop it before it starts. But Gabriel didn't look convinced. There's something else, he said, lowering his voice. One of our internal servers was accessed last night from an external IP in Singapore. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What was accessed? Gabriel flipped a page in the file. Only one document. Your daughter's enrollment form for her school. Silence. Alexander stood up slowly. They're not just coming after the company, he said. They're coming after my family. Gabriel nodded. That's why I'm doubling your security detail, moving Sophie to a private homeschooling program, and scrubbing all personal identifiers from public databases. Alexander didn't argue. He walked to the window, jaw clenched. The skyline looked peaceful, but he knew better. People like Nakamura didn't lose quietly. He turned to Gabriel. And Naomi? Already briefed. She's reviewing new security protocols with HR and legal. I've never seen someone adapt so fast. Alexander allowed himself a brief smile. She was never just a maid. No, Gabriel said. She's more dangerous to them than either of us. That afternoon, Alexander met Naomi in the newly renovated Ethics and Risk Division, an entire floor that didn't even exist 6 weeks ago. Now, it buzzed with analysts, whistleblower liaisons, digital forensics teams. And at the center of it all, Naomi Reed. She looked up from her desk as he entered. Gabriel told you? She asked. He nodded. They accessed Sophie's file. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She simply picked up her phone and began typing something. I've already activated the emergency protocols for all employees' families. We're locking down the external server until further notice, migrating all sensitive records to cold storage, and I'm bringing in 2 cybersecurity consultants from Tel Aviv to run intrusion simulations. Alexander stared at her, a little stunned. You've already done all that? Naomi looked at him without blinking. I'm not letting them get close. Not to her. Not to you. Alexander sat down across from her. I thought this was over, he said quietly. After Sebastian and Rachel, I thought we could breathe again. Naomi shook her head. Sebastian was the front. Rachel was the hand. But Nakamura, he's the brain. He leaned forward. So what do we do? She didn't hesitate. We expose him. Alexander blinked. You want to go after a billionaire crime financier with ties to 3 countries and immunity in Japan? Naomi's voice was steady. Yes. He studied her face. There was no anger there, just focus. Clarity. Purpose. Then we don't just play defense, he said. We take the fight to them. Naomi nodded. It's time we show them what it really looks like when the underestimated fight back. It started at 6 a.m., long before the city came alive. Gabriel Torres sat inside an unmarked surveillance van 3 blocks from Nakamura Capital's Midtown office. The air inside was thick with stale coffee and tension. A tablet rested on his lap, streaming a feed from an unauthorized entry point into Nakamura's private communications server, one of the few digital doors they hadn't managed to shut completely. Meanwhile, inside CraneTech's newly built risk division, Naomi Reed coordinated quietly with her cyber team. 2 Israeli consultants sat beside her, monitoring packet flows and firewall breaches in real time, their eyes darting between cascading lines of code and heat maps of data transfer. The room was dark, illuminated only by glowing monitors, flickering graphs, and the occasional reflection of Naomi's focused gaze. We're in, Naomi said over the encrypted comm line. Level 2 access granted. We're inside their data structure now. Alexander Crane stood just behind her, arms crossed, suited but tieless, his face set like stone. His presence wasn't ornamental, he had come to act. His company had been attacked, his daughter targeted, and his name dragged through the mud. He wasn't just playing defense anymore. 4 weeks, Nakamura's network had been cleaning house, relocating servers, wiping metadata, scrubbing documentation. But they had not anticipated a counterstrike led by the very woman they had dismissed as a nobody. And they certainly hadn't planned for that woman to be operating with precision from inside the heart of CraneTech itself. Node 3 connects to their Cayman Islands gateway, Naomi said, typing rapidly. That's where the shell companies route their transactions. If we can extract metadata from that server, we can map the entire laundering chain. Gabriel's voice crackled through. Traffic spike detected. We're being pinged. They've noticed something. Naomi didn't flinch. That's just an automated warning. They haven't flagged our IP yet. We've got maybe 60 seconds, no more. Alexander leaned in. And if they trace the signal? They'll initiate a server-wide lockout, followed by a full wipe. We'll lose everything. Naomi's fingers flew across the keyboard. She toggled the route, redirected through Buenos Aires, masked the CraneTech node with a private VPN tunnel buried behind a South African textile distributor. The window of time was shrinking. She clicked on a folder marked SPV2 Holdings, the same name that had shown up in Sebastian's Cayman transfers. Accessing metadata now, she said. 30% downloaded. 55. On Gabriel's screen, a red alert began to blink. Sector lockdown initiated. They found us. Hey, come on, Naomi whispered, her eyes locked. My foot, 97, stun. She yanked the encrypted drive from the port and handed it straight to Alexander. This contains the full trail, she said. Account ownership, transfer routes, shell names, dates. And at least 3 authorizations from Nakamura's office. Alexander stared down at the small silver device in his palm. It felt almost too light for what it carried. Can we tie any of it directly to Nakamura himself? He asked. Naomi opened a secondary folder she had mirrored during the download. Her breath caught. There's a scanned Japanese regulatory filing here, she said slowly. A contract amendment. 3 companies listed, one of them traced back to a Tokyo law firm. At the bottom, She enlarged the signature line. Alexander leaned in. There was. Red seal. Clear name. Kazuo Nakamura. Alexander let out a breath. Then it's time. 10 hours later, the press conference was packed. The Crane Tech auditorium had never seen so many cameras, microphones, and national news anchors pressed shoulder to shoulder. Alexander didn't stand behind the podium. He stood center stage, nothing between him and the world but the truth. 4 years, he said clearly, men like Kazuo Nakamura have hidden behind offshore accounts, proxies, and corporate smoke. They've operated in silence, stripping companies from the people who built them. They assumed no one would stand up, that no one would fight back. That ends today. He held up the flash drive in his hand. This device contains detailed evidence of an international financial laundering network spanning 5 countries, 12 shell corporations, and hundreds of millions of dollars in falsified transactions. These documents lead back to Nakamura Capital and directly to Mr. Kazuo Nakamura. The room erupted in flashes. Several reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions. Alexander didn't respond. He wasn't there to play politics. This investigation wasn't led by a law firm, he continued. It wasn't solved by a board committee. It was stopped by 3 people who were underestimated. A woman who was dismissed as a maid. A man fired for being too thorough. And a child they never even saw coming. In the back of the room, Naomi stood quietly with Gabriel beside her. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. Alexander's voice hardened. Crane Tech will cooperate fully with the SEC, the Department of Justice, and Interpol. We've already submitted the evidence, and we will support any investigation launched from this point forward. But more importantly, we are launching a new internal program to protect whistleblowers, those who speak the truth, no matter their title. He stepped back from the mic. There were no final words. No slogans. Just silence. Later that night, after the reporters had gone and the sun had long set behind the skyline, Alexander sat in his office, staring down at the flash drive again. The lights were low. Outside the window, New York shimmered in gold and blue. Naomi entered quietly. "You should sleep," she said. He looked up. "So should you." She smiled faintly. "What happens now?" He didn't answer immediately. "He won't go quietly," Alexander said. "Men like Nakamura don't just disappear. They regroup. They retaliate." Naomi nodded. "Then we stay alert. We stay one step ahead." He looked at her with quiet resolve. "We've come this far," he said. "Let's finish it." She sat beside him, not as a subordinate, not even as a colleague, but as an equal. The room was quiet, but something between them had shifted permanently. Outside, the world still spun, unaware of the war that had just begun again. But inside that room, the lines were clear. And this time, the people no one noticed had fired the first shot. 2 weeks later, New York City woke up to a storm. Not rain, not wind, but headlines. Crane Texo accuses Nakamura Capital of global laundering scheme. Crane's whistleblower director wants a housemaid. From maid to hero, Naomi Reed's bold rise shakes corporate world. It was everywhere. Television, newspapers, financial blogs, even morning radio. The world was watching. And more importantly, the world was finally listening. Alexander Crane sat in the back seat of a black sedan headed toward the federal courthouse. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, eyes sharp, body still. Naomi sat beside him, holding a sealed evidence folder. Her expression was unreadable, calm like still water, but her grip on the folder betrayed the weight of what was inside. Outside, crowds were already forming. Protesters. Reporters. Curious onlookers who had only ever seen corporate scandal from a distance. But this one was different. This was personal. This was human. Gabriel Torres waited at the courthouse steps, speaking with federal agents in dark suits. He gave them a curt nod when the car pulled up, then opened the door for Alexander and Naomi. "You're right on time," he said. "Are the others here?" Alexander asked. "DOJ, SEC, FBI, and 3 Japanese delegates. They're waiting upstairs." Naomi didn't say anything as she followed them in. Her mind was laser-focused on what they had come to do. The hearing wasn't a trial, not yet, but it was the first official handover of evidence, a coordinated effort to begin formal prosecution. The feds had asked for every document, every timestamp, every recording. And Crane Tech had delivered. As the three of them entered the secured briefing room, all conversation stopped. Men in dark suits sat around a long conference table, folders in front of them. A U.S. flag hung on one side of the room, the seal of the Justice Department on the other. The lead prosecutor stood and extended a hand. Mr. Crane. Ms. Reed. Mr. Torres. Thank you for coming. Alexander nodded. Naomi gave a small shake of the head. Thank you for listening. They sat, and the room settled. Let's begin, the prosecutor said. You claim that Kazuo Nakamura personally authorized the laundering of over $300 million through false subsidiaries. Do you have direct proof of his involvement? Naomi placed the flash drive on the table and pushed it forward. Encrypted documents, metadata trails, login credentials, and a contract amendment signed by Nakamura himself. One of the agents took it and plugged it into a secure terminal. Screens lit up instantly, flow charts, names, dates, transaction logs. A murmur swept the room. This is extensive, one agent whispered. This isn't just laundering. It's international corporate warfare. Gabriel added, and it's not isolated. We've already traced similar patterns in 2 other companies linked to Nakamura. The lead prosecutor turned to Naomi. And you gathered this how, Ms. Reed? Through legal access to internal data, she replied calmly. I was given authority by Mr. Crane, and I used my skills to monitor activity, analyze backdoors, and trace digital movement. Every document here was acquired within legal bounds. And your background is in cleaning services? A few agents smirked. Naomi didn't. My background, she said evenly, is in observation, persistence, and listening when others don't. And that, apparently, is more useful than most boardroom degrees. The smirks faded. The room continued in silence as agents examined the data, whispering to one another, highlighting portions of contracts and schedules. Then the prosecutor spoke again. Mr. Crane, are you prepared for what this means? Alexander leaned forward. You mean retaliation? I mean exposure. You're not just accusing Nakamura. You're challenging a global system that protects men like him. You could become a target. Alexander didn't blink. I already am. He looked over at Naomi. And I'm not standing alone. Later that evening, a press conference was held on the steps of the courthouse. Hundreds of people stood outside, phones raised, microphones out. This time, Alexander did stand behind the podium. But he didn't speak first. Naomi did. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the mic. My name is Naomi Reed. Some of you know me as the maid who stopped a corporate fraud. But I'm not here to talk about what I used to be. I'm here to talk about what we must become. The crowd quieted. For too long, people like me, people without titles, without influence, have been invisible. But silence isn't the absence of power. Sometimes it's the first sign of a storm. She paused, letting that settle. What happened at Crane Tech isn't just a scandal. It's a lesson. Power only exists unchallenged when good people stay quiet. I didn't stay quiet. And neither should you. Behind her, Alexander nodded with pride. She stepped aside, and he took the podium. This is just the beginning, he said. We're going to expose everything. And when we're done, we won't just have saved one company. We'll have changed how power works, from the ground up. Applause broke out, not from politicians or executives, but from workers, cleaners, drivers, IT assistants, interns, people like Naomi. And in that moment, the world didn't just see a CEO and a whistleblower. They saw a reckoning. And it had a face. 6 months later, the name Crane Tech meant something different. Not just a technology company. Not just a survivor of corporate sabotage. But a symbol of reckoning, of redemption, and of what could happen when overlooked people took the lead. The Nakamura scandal had spread across headlines worldwide. After months of investigation and mounting evidence, including the metadata, wire transfers, signed amendments, and sworn testimony, Interpol had issued formal charges. Kazuo Nakamura, once untouchable, had vanished. Rumors said he was hiding somewhere in the Swiss Alps, others claimed South Korea. But wherever he was, his empire was crumbling. CraneTech, however, was rising. It began with a shift in hiring. Alexander opened a new division, the Reed Initiative, named after Naomi, though she tried repeatedly to convince him otherwise. It offered career pathways to overlooked workers inside and outside the company, janitors who wanted to learn code, cafeteria workers with a gift for logistics, receptionists with law degrees from other countries. Naomi now sat on the company's executive board, not as a token figure, but as director of ethics and social innovation. Her decisions shaped policies, rewrote training protocols, and inspired companies across the country to copy what CraneTech had done. And yet, for all her new authority, Naomi never changed her habits. She still walked the halls, still visited the cleaning staff, still remembered everyone's name. One Friday afternoon, she stepped into the daycare wing where Sophie now spent part of her afternoons with other employees' children. The little girl came running the moment she saw Naomi. "Look." Sophie held up a paper crown covered in glitter. "I'm the CEO." Naomi laughed and knelt down. "You sure are." Behind them, Alexander stood in the doorway, watching. Later that evening, he joined Naomi on the rooftop garden they had built above the executive floor. The city stretched out below, lights blinking in rhythmic waves. "You know," he said, handing her a glass of tea, "a year ago I thought legacy was about how much you could build before you die." Naomi looked at him, smiling faintly. "And now?" He gestured toward the building beneath them. "Now I think it's about what you leave standing when you're not in the room." She nodded. "That's what my grandmother used to say." He turned to her, serious now. "I never told you this, but after she passed, Josephine left behind a letter addressed to someone named Alexander. My name. She wrote that if I ever felt lost, I should look for the girl with her eyes and her stubbornness." Naomi's breath caught. "I didn't understand it back then," Alexander continued. "I assumed it was just poetry. But now, I think she knew this would happen. Maybe not the details. But something told her we'd find each other." Naomi looked out at the city. She always believed in timing, that things fall apart just enough to fall into place. Alexander leaned against the railing beside her. "You could have walked away," he said. "You could have let them destroy me." "I didn't do it for you," Naomi replied. "I did it for Sophie. For people who never got a chance. For women scrubbing conference rooms while men inside plotted empires." He nodded slowly. "That's why it worked. Because you never wanted power. You just refused to let them keep stealing it." A breeze passed between them, soft and steady. Below, employees were still working late in quiet corners of the building. Lights flickered on one floor, dimmed on another. Inside this new legacy, people were no longer invisible. Naomi finished her tea and placed the cup down. "So what happens next?" she asked. Alexander smiled. "We keep going. We fight for the people no one sees. And if they try to take it again, we strike first," she said. He looked at her. "Together." She nodded once. And just like that, a maid, a millionaire, and a child had reshaped an empire. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in the strength of unseen voices, subscribe to the channel for more cinematic stories that empower, challenge, and transform. Drop a comment. What was the most powerful moment in Naomi's journey? Like, share, and let's give a voice to those who refuse to be invisible. Your story could be next.